Mark. And ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to a very special edition of Nerdy Notions with Sasha Kaplan.
That's me! Who randomly is always off kilter position-wise. That's just how I am. I'm special like that. And Michael quietly nods for me to move to my right. So thank you to our... How many negative listeners are we up to at this point?
Well, right now, it looks like on Twitch we have 0 people. So I'm going to go with about maybe negative 100 at this point now.
Yeah, so we started counting like negative by like 7s or something when the show's like about halfway through our like run of Nerdy Notions. It just kind of happened that way.
I think at Age of Ultron, is either Age of Ultron or Thor Dark World. Maybe
Dark World,
Dark
World.
Yeah, Dark World.
No, maybe it was before. I feel like it was around the end of Phase 1 that we started doing it. But it's
which is around Dark World because Dark World was the second movie of Phase 2.
Well, okay, so closer to the end of Phase 1, but maybe not quite into Phase 2. For those that don't know, we've been reviewing the Marvel films over the course of, like, I think it was like starting from like our 3rd episode or something, and it's been a lot of fun. Okay, 4th episode.
But that's because the 3rd episode was the San Diego Comic-Con episode.
That's right.
Yeah.
And San Diego Comic-Con is going to be online now, which is kind of cool, and actually open to the public, which is even cooler. So this should be an interesting experience. I hope it all works out for them. Yeah.
So, with that, ladies and gentlemen, it is Pride Month. We decided to take a break from the MCU for this 1 week to do a Pride Month special, which I'm hoping it shows that on Twitch. If not, I have editing to do.
Dun, dun, dun.
I don't know. I think I have a dashboard somewhere that lets me look at it. I'll look at it later. So we're doing Pride Month. As you can tell by underneath our names, we are doing LGBT history and representation and Marvel. And as you can tell, this is a little different from the last time we did something like this on a Facebook Live or Twitch. Well, this is our first time on Twitch, but for a Facebook Live. Because we're doing this now. Look at that beautiful PowerPoint presentation. It's so pretty.
It is pretty, and thank you so much for saying so, because it was very painstaking to make. And it was a lot of fun to make, but it was a lot of work, so it's nice to be appreciated. If anybody saw my panel at AwesomeCon 2019 or GalaxyCon 2019 and 2020, there's like one other convention, but anyway.
There's that convention. It's there.
There's always that one other convention that like nobody saw me at, but this is a presentation that I always have a lot of fun giving. I always have a lot of really interesting conversations afterwards with folks. So I'm excited. I think this will be a lot of fun, and we're up to like 2 whole people tuning in, so that's nice.
Yeah, it's probably both of us.
Oh, but there's 3 people then.
Then there's
who's the third?
So I'm going to tell you right now how Twitch works, and then we're going to start this PowerPoint presentation. If you're watching yourself on another monitor, like the way I am, so I'm watching the feed on my phone, that counts as 1 viewer. And you're watching the stream, so that's 2 viewers. So whoever the 3rd viewer is, please say hi. We have a comments thread. Bring it on. So, but with that, we have the PowerPoint presentation.
We do.
So I'm going to take that as my cue to go to the very first slide, which is the disclaimer.
Let's get to the disclaimer. But first, also, we do have the chat. Join us. We're gaining. So please join us in the chat. Ask us questions. There will be a Q&A afterwards. But let's talk about my disclaimer. The disclaimer is as follows. These opinions are my own. I am not here as a representative of Marvel Comics. I unfortunately, tears, I do not work for Marvel Comics. Maybe one day, but at present, I am just me, doing this for fun and my own desire to one day be a full-fledged professional comic book historian. So All that means is that if you disagree, I encourage you to, because I have managed to piss off a lot of people with some of these opinions. I'm very proud of that personally, but all of these opinions are my own. You are allowed to disagree with me. You can ask me questions, but please be respectful of myself, of Michael, who is basically managed to put all this together, and is amazing. And you know, be respectful to the other folks in the comment sections who might have different perspectives. Exceptions are, of course, for people that are just there to troll. If you're just here to troll, well, then I'm not here to protect you. So you do you.
And here's the thing, I am running the PowerPoint,
He is.
and I'm moderating the chat.
Yeah.
Don't do anything that's gonna make me want to stop this. Just don't. So, moving on to the next slide.
So yeah, and also one last quick thing. We can stay on the next slide. Is that not all of the LGBTQIA Marvel characters that exist are represented here. The reason for this is there's too many of them to pull from, too many of them that are like one-off characters that don't have much development. So I can't devote a lot of time to them if there's nothing to say beyond like, oh, hey, here's this one character that happens to be not straight in this one comic, because then there's nothing to analyze and nothing to discuss other than like one panel or, you know, one issue or two issues that had them as nothing more than a side character. So Marvel started out in the officially as Marvel Comics. It debuted slightly later in 1961, but it was Timely Comics first, then it was Atlas, and finally settled on Marvel Comics. A few names to keep in mind. These are the big names. Martin Goodman, who was the publisher or first editor, Jack Kirby, Joe Simon, Stan Lee. Other names to remember is, of course, Jim Shooter, John Byrne, J.M. DeMatteis, Alan Heinberg, Hiram Gillen, Peter David. I will be naming most of these folks at some point again, so if you didn't catch that, that's okay. So the one thing that's really important to note is the Comics Code Authority. When the code came out, it was a way to regulate comics away from what government and society had deemed to be too adult. And so what ends up happening is you have these regulations. Some of these regulations are so bad when you're thinking about a children's medium, like no excessive violence or gore, no nudity, good must triumph over evil, which is kind of boring, but there it is. But there's other things that were kind of bizarre. So like scenes dealing with or instruments associated with Walking Dead, torture, vampires, ghouls, cannibalism. So anything that was like deemed too dark, you couldn't even publish, even if the intent was to publish to an adult audience. But there's a very important piece of this, and this is this general standard C subsection marriage and sex. So what does that mean? It means that divorce shall not be treated as humorous or representative as desirable. You cannot have illicit sex relations which are neither to be hinted at nor portrayed. So violent love scenes as well as sexual abnormalities are unacceptable. What that means is up to your unique imagination. 3, respect for parents and the moral code. Anybody that knows anything about LGBT rights knows that this concept of the moral code has often been used against the LGBT community. And for honorable behavior shall be fostered. A sympathetic understanding of the problems of love is not licensed for morbid distortion. So basically, you can have a slightly love triangle-ish as long as it's like cookie cutter and you don't really do anything interesting or develop it as anything beyond superficial. The treatment of live romance stories shall emphasize the value of the home and the sanctity of marriage. I'm just going to leave that here without comment because it's obvious. Passion or romantic interest shall never be treated in such a way as to stimulate the lower and baser emotions. Well, children, that's not a comic you want to read if that's the case. But this is kind of interesting because even at the time before the code, there wasn't a lot of there was violence and darkness in comics. There's a lot of horror comics, that severed head with like an axe, but there was never the comics didn't border on porn at any moment as far as I can remember. Although to be fair, the early Wonder Woman comics were very S&M heavy. seduction and rape shall never be shown or suggested. Yeah, that one seems kind of fair in some capacity. Sex, perversion, or any inference to same is strictly forbidden. That's a mouthful to say, but basically, no gays allowed. Nothing. Like, even if the thing is like you could arguably go around the code slightly and have like 2 male characters or 2 female characters that are like really close and touchy-feely, but there's that moral code and sanctity of marriage stuff that impedes all of that. So there's very limit to what we can do in the comics. So with that, a lot of people ask about the X-Men. The answer is no. The answer is 100% no. I am not here to talk about the X-Men. The X-Men are in some capacity allegory for gay rights, but they are not an allegory for everyone. Or excuse me, they are an allegory for everyone. They're not a strict allegory for just gay rights or the LGBT community. It's an allegory about racism. It's an allegory about anti-Semitism. It's an allegory about for any marginalized community to be able to relate to the X-Men, and that was the intent. So with that, let's jump right in to what is the first appearance of some type of non-straight individual in a comic book. Brace yourselves, people. So this is all a very interesting comic that was written by Jim Shooter. I told you that name would come back. So it starts with Bruce Banner, who has just demorphed from being the Hulk. And he decides to go to the local YMCA in order to, I guess, get a shower or whatever. And we see these 2 men there. One is white and one is, I would argue, somewhat very kind of racistly portrayed. That's not a word, but that's the only one I've got right now. It's, but it gets worse from here. So just to kind of summarize the storyline, basically, Bruce Banner is almost raped by these 2 men in a YMCA. So first of all, there's obvious notes of racism here, and it's very, very homophobic. And Bruce is like so repulsed by it that he almost like morphs back into the Hulk right outside of this YMCA. And oh my lord. So this is obviously horribly problematic, very badly written, very badly portrayed. And people call Jim Shooter out on this, and they're like, Jim, buddy, like, what's going on? Like, why did you do this? And he's like, well, this is an incident that happened to a friend of mine. Okay, not a good enough excuse. It's just not. Like, this is a teenager's first introduction to a gay character. Like, that's just so wrong on so many levels. But Jim Shooter, as far as I know, last I heard, still defends this. So, whatever. But let's get to the positive. Let's get to the positive. And let's talk about one of my favorite minor comic book characters, Arnie Roth. Arnie Roth is a treasure for several reasons. The first being that he is Captain America's best friend. He is Captain America's only friend when he's a child, back before in the pre-war days. Arnie is there to defend Steve. Arnie is there to protect Steve. Steve spent a lot of time at Arnie's house. Arnie Roth is also Jewish, which is why, obviously I love all the Jewish characters. So Arnie is, when he's Steve's buddy from World War II. He is one part of the blender that they made into MCU Bucky. So one part was 616 Bucky, one part was Arnie Roth, and together you have the smash. So when these 2 men reunite years later, we find out that Arnie's actually not doing so well. He is actually kind of distraught because his best friend and roommate has vanished or has gone missing or has been kidnapped, as is often the case with, love interest for anybody. And Arnie and Steve, so Steve doesn't have a problem with this. He's like, yeah, let me, help you. And when Michael is ultimately reunited with Arnie, there's this tender moment and they hug, and Arnie talks about how he's never he's never, marriage wasn't for him and all this jazz. And there's a couple of, in the last panel that I have on this slide, you see this like kind of like a tender moment. There's the hug, but then there's also this like, it's thank you so much, Cap, you're the greatest. And Steve comes in, it's like, hope I'm not interrupting anything. So J.M. DeMatteis, who created Arnie Roth and created this, was very specific about, very open about the fact that yes, Arnie is intended to be a gay character. Arnie is also used as a foil here as a parallel for Steve's relationship with his girlfriend Bernie Rosenthal. And Steve's openness and his ability to be or I guess Arnie's openness about his relationship with Michael and the tenderness between the two actually helped Steve to be more open with Bernie and to express his love for her. But of course, it's comics and nobody's allowed to be happy ever. So Michael dies first and then Arnie dies later. I don't believe that was J.M. DeMatteis. I think that was a later writer, but it happens. So let's talk about the first gay superhero, because we have to. And that first gay superhero, if Michael hits the first and then the second tab so we can see the full picture of the team, we have, one more. We have this character named Northstar, who is Canadian, and he is an athlete, and we later find out that he's a mutant and he loses his trophies and things. And so he's part of this Canadian team called Alpha Flight, but we never get anything about him in relation to him being gay specifically, other than the fact that he's not into girls. So we can go back to that last picture on this slide.
We'll start with North Star.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Sure. So Arnie's Northstar's not into girls. We often have this, like, we kind of see him maybe checking out men a little bit, but he was always conceived to be a gay character. John Byrne said that from the beginning, but he wasn't allowed to make him gay. So if we move to the next slide, we're going to talk about how Northstar came out a little bit. So Northstar wasn't allowed to come out for pretty much a decade. He was created in 1979. He doesn't come out until 1994. So you can see this very stark change in the art. So we went from this 70s, like big hair, into the buff of the latter half of the 80s and the 90s. So Northstar comes out in an issue of Alpha Flight, where the storyline is about a little girl, and you can see the incubator in the photo, who is found and adopted by Northstar, and it is revealed that this child has AIDS. This is actually the second time somebody has tried to get Northstar to come out of the closet. The first time they had this whole shtick about him having an illness, and the illness would be revealed to be AIDS, and then he would but that couldn't happen. So instead they had to rewrite the last issue that revealed this and to do something else. So what did they do in their infinite non-wisdom? They made him a fairy, a literal fairy, where the whole thing was he's not a mutant, he's part of the Fae people. But anyway, finally Northstar's allowed to come out. But how does he do this? He fights the most Canadian villain I could ever see in my entire life, a Mountie. And you can see this in the photos, but this is a tragic character. This is a lot about Northstar coming to understand the impact that he has as a person, as part of Alpha Flight, as a former Olympic athlete and all that jazz. And the storyline is really important because it talks about the fact that Northstar was, in the closet for many years, but everybody flipped their lid oh my God, there's this child dying of AIDS and it's so sad, and the media took it, in canon that is. And it's actually revealed that this Mountie actually lost his son to the AIDS epidemic. And there's that tender moment, you can see in that last panel, where he's hugging the Mountie, and North Star realizes that staying silent is not an option. So we can see the newspaper now where it says Alpha Flight's North Star proclaims homosexuality. That's a terrible headline for a newspaper. I'm just putting that out there right now. So that is the story of North Star. But as we go to the next slide, let's ask ourselves, is North Star good representation? The answer is because North Star effectively is okay representation. He's the first visible gay superhero that we see. But in the later series of comics, he kind of falls into a trap that we see for a lot of X-Men characters. The iconic storylines that exist with him are usually he gets killed, brainwashed, brought back, killed, brainwashed, etc. So it's kind of like this loop. It happens multiple times. But the good thing is that we also have our first LGBT wedding that happens on panel in a comic, which is North Star marrying his boyfriend Kyle, and the final photo on this slide is of course that astonishing X-Men number 51, where they officially get married. It's a very sweet issue. If you're a fan of the X-Men at all, I really recommend reading it. It's really sweet. It's kind of funny watching North Star dealing with Kyle's parents and then like having to do wedding stuff, and everybody from Alpha Flight is there and the X-Men are there, and of course the two are not the greatest of friends, but it's very sweet. It's very sweet. So this is a new addition to my PowerPoint, but this is very important. This next slide. I'm gonna breeze through this, but basically, if you didn't know that Mystique and Destiny were a thing, like shocker, Mystique and Destiny are a thing. Mystique is, of course, a shape-shifting mutant, and as you can see here, she and Irene don't age in the same way as everybody else, which is why you have them in this like late 1870s, 1880s Victorian outfits. So the original conception for this, for Nightcrawler's parents, it was the idea that Irene was his mom, but Mystique was his dad because she's a shapeshifter. And that later got scrapped and Mystique remained his mother. But Irene and the other hints to their relationship was mostly the fact that Irene was the only person that Mystique genuinely seemed to like and got along with and had mutual respect for. And I love this last photo here because it's so, it's such a sweet moment because they do end up raising Rogue together after a certain, when they find Rogue as a runaway, I believe. So they have been officially confirmed, but Irene is dead now, unfortunately. And the explanation we got, so Mystique is now currently working on Krakoa for Charles or whatever, and it's unfortunate that so Mystique asks Charles as a reward for doing her job, whatever it was, to bring back Irene. And Charles says no because Charles is a jerk, but also because Irene is a precog and precogs aren't allowed on Krakoa. So Krakoa is not the best place in the world.
So give me 1 second real quick because I think my car alarm's going off.
Oh, that's not good.
Okay, so it's not my car, it's somebody else's. Go on.
So, we've had some happy moments. Let's talk about another bad comic, and that's the next slide. And, oh my lord, I don't know who thought of this. I don't know why this was conceived. I don't know why anybody thought this was a good idea, but Marvel had something called Max Comics. Max with 2X. To be extra epic for, I don't know, some reason.
Well, the Max series, I actually read the Max series, but for the Punisher.
So I'm getting to that. So the idea was that the Punisher was supposed to be more adult-oriented comics. So, Alias Investigations was one of the comics that was originally published under this tagline. The idea was to have more adult stories that were for an adult audiences. Anybody who reads Alias knows that it's a very adult-oriented comic. Once again, quick reminder for anybody that's just joined us, put some questions in the chat room. We are monitoring the chat. We are excited to see you, all 5 of you, or two of you. But either way, so as let's look at these panels. They relaunched Rawhide Kid as a sort of new character who is it's cringy. The dialogue is weird. He's very stereotypical. He hits on this dad while his wife is literally standing right there, and he's all flamboyant to the point of like it's pure stereotyping. I have no words for it. Michael can go ahead and post all of the panels for this slide, because this is just like the one credit I will give this comic is that it did sort of try to do something with this. And there's a scene where he has a flashback to his childhood where his dad like beats the crap out of him because he's gay. And it's very sad and an unfortunate reality for the time period that this takes place, I guess. But one good panel doesn't erase all of the other crap. So let's see this. This is Richter and Shatterstar. Richter and Shatterstar are the 80s, you know, they were on X-Force together. Richter is a mutant with the power to listen to the earth. He's kind of tough, but he doesn't bend the earth exactly. Or he's like Daisy Johnson, and his powers were from the earth as opposed to from the hands. And you have Shatterstar, who is from Mojo World. Mojo World, that very peaceful place where nothing happy ever happens, ever, ever. And so the two have an interesting relationship in the sense that, like, as you look through some of these photos, the next, like, two photos, you see in the second one that Richter is about to leave, and Shatterstar's like, no, I don't want you to leave. I hope you miss your flight. And in a later issue, you have this moment here where Shatterstar is fighting with, I think it's Banshee. And she says, it says, she has lost Warpath, he has lost Richter. Both see the missing teammates as friends, both too stubborn to admit they may want more than that. And then we see in the next page here that you see like the kind of distressed look on Shatterstar's face. Shatterstar was originally actually conceived to be kind of asexual, but that was later retconned it was kind of retconned multiple times, because the first time it was retconned that like, oh, he's actually like, I guess, pansexual. But then it was like he came from like the sexless planet, then that was retconned as well in Shatterstar Solo. So anyway, we see these two guys reunite officially, and now you can go ahead to the next slide, Michael.
Okay, to the deets.
To the deets. Let's get to the deets. So Shatterstar and Richter reunite in X Factor, which is a post M-Day comic where everyone is a lot of mutants are depowered, Richter among them, and he ends up joining with Multiple Man, and he and Guido end up going on this mission to visit a dupe of Jamie Madrox, who's the leader of the team. And they get attacked, and the attackers actually brainwashed Shatterstar, and they managed to break Shatterstar free from this. And the first thing he does when he sees Richter is to make out with him. And Guido's like, okay, didn't see that coming. But Guido does grow as a character, even if some of the initial interactions are very kind of homophobic. But to make a long story short, Shatterstar and Richter need more development, because initially Richter and Shatterstar were together, and then Shatterstar's like, I want to explore my sexuality, and I want you to be my guide, which on the one hand, when you come from a sexist planet, is understandable, but also Richter's kind of very monogamous. It's kind of unclear if anything ever happens beyond the flirting. Shatterstar is basically like a slightly more homicidal Jack Harkness, if any Doctor Who fans out there. There's also an interesting subplot here of like Richter's ex-girlfriend. You can go through the panels, Michael, of Richter's girlfriend Ronnie here, who mistakes. She's also comes off homophobic initially, but then learns that this literally has nothing to do with her and it's none of her business. Although the taxi ride between her and Richter is hilarious. So definitely check out this comic. So right now, Richter, we can go to the next slide. Richter and Shatterstar are unfortunately broken up. Shatterstar had his own solo that I mentioned earlier that retconned that sexless planet thing. Coolio is now a cool druid-ish in the new Excalibur series written by Tini Howard, whom I hate. But anyway, let's go to the next slide. But before we do, they do have room to grow. They need more development. I think getting them back together is really important. But I'll go over kind of my general notes for all of these characters at the end. And if there's questions, and I'm sure Michael will come up with a few questions at the end if we don't get any. So let's move on to my favorite team. My favorite team right here. That is Billy and Teddy. So we're going to talk about the Heinberg run. So Alan Heinberg conceived this beautiful, beautiful comic. It follows the events of Disassembled, where the Avengers have disbanded, and this group of sidekicks shows up. Billy, for those that don't know, is the son of the Scarlet Witch and Vision, and him and his twin Tommy will allegedly appear in the WandaVision series. And Teddy is the son of the Kree Captain Marvel, who is not a woman, and the Skrull Princess Anel. So there's a point where the characters try to come out to their parents about being a superhero. So this is where the next photo comes in. Except they don't end up coming out. Billy ends up coming out. Billy's Jewish, by the way, and he ends up coming out to his Jewish parents in the most hilarious way possible. Instead of telling him he's a superhero, he doesn't get that far, and his mom's like, "Oh, we've always known," and that's it. Teddy's invited to the family. If that's not the best coming out story in comics, I don't know what is. We see their character development over the course of the majority of Heinberg run with some things in between. In the next picture here, we see them a lot of these like soft words and hugs and touches on the face, and there is an intimacy there that I think helps the two characters a lot. And we do ultimately see their first on-panel kiss after like 7 years. It finally happens, which gets interrupted by Miss Marvel. Not cool, Carol. Not cool. But this is it's a very sweet moment. But after all of the events that happen in Children's Crusade, you guys can PM me on my blog afterwards for the details, or just search my blog because it's literally all I write about these days. But there is a lot of Heinberg wanted to emphasize the importance of seeing these two characters as three-dimensional figures, as individuals with, strengths and weaknesses, with backstories and character flaws, which are clearly displayed in this last page here. As Billy is about to leave for Latveria, he writes me a letter like, "I'm sorry, I'm an idiot. Like, you're gonna come save me, but I need to do this." And they don't always get along. Sometimes they disagree. Sometimes they fight. Sometimes Teddy calls him an idiot boyfriend because sometimes Billy can be an idiot. But there's a tenderness, and there's a lot of development just in the original Young Avengers run and in Children's Crusade, and even in the in-between, that really shows their relationship, I think, much better than any on-panel kiss would have. But we're not allowed to be happy for long. As we go on to the next slide. As you will see here in this slide, after Children's Crusade ended, Kieran Gillen showed up. And if anybody's ever read my blog, you know that I cannot stand Kieran Gillen. Just look at these first 2 pages here. Billy, who has been depressed over the loss of their friends, is angry at Teddy for dressing up as a superhero behind his back and not telling him about it. And Teddy basically tells him that, well, you can't be depressed because you have people who love you and parents and blah, 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 blah. And that's not how depression works, folks. If anybody doesn't know, telling somebody that they have that they have a family that loves them, or that, they have an amazing boyfriend is not necessarily it's not a cure-all for depression. That's not how that works. And look, I want to point out, this, just the Bieber haircut, this turns a really well-developed relationship, in my opinion, into a whiny teen soap opera that was never necessary. It turns these characters first of all, it turns their relationship sour. in my opinion, because Billy's effectively being shamed for his depression. But it's also really damaging to Teddy's character because we can see, you can see in the next, I think it's in the next photo here, that like
I went to the third one.
Sorry, that like I'm trying to find the right word here, but basically like Teddy's like, I fell in love with a superhero and you're all I need, and like I'm a shapeshifter so I can be everything you need, and like that's not how, that's not okay. That's just not okay. So as we move on to the next set of pictures, we find out that Billy releases an interdimensional parasite, blah, blah, blah. It wasn't really him. It was Loki being a jerk, whatever. Billy tries to kill himself. And this is never addressed, really. And to add, insult to the wound, as we move on to these next batch of photos, ending with Teddy finding out with Loki telling Teddy that, like, oh, you're not, like, what if Billy just like made you up and tweaked reality so that you would fall in love with him? And this is never addressed. This is never resolved. It's never confirmed yay or nay. They just kind of decide like, oh, it doesn't matter. First of all, yes, it matters. Second of all, this is bad writing. This is such bad writing because it adds this unnecessary seed of conflict to an otherwise well-developed relationship. And yes, couples fight, couples have issues, but this is turning something that like you could have had, it could have been done better, but that would require a writer to give a shit, and Galen didn't. Like he just didn't. I'm sorry if this hurts somebody. So moving on to the next couple of photos, we're gonna move on to Teenie Howard. Teenie Howard is, I don't know what her hate boner is for Billy. I don't. I apologize for my language, but she just doesn't, I don't get her. I just don't. But I think there's an unfortunate attempt by some writers and artists to kind of put Billy into like the non-existent girl in their relationship, which is, I think, really damaging to both characters and to the portrayal of, same-sex couples in general. Like, you can see Billy, like, you can just see from the art what a stark contrast it is. Billy's such a proud and well-developed character, and this just all kind of goes off the handle. And Teenie Howard continues this as we move on to the next photos into Strike Force, where Billy's just kind of whiny. At least he's not a goth now, but he's still he went from this like snarky character to this like bitchy character, and I don't necessarily understand where he came from. But there is this attempt for some reason to put Billy into this more stereotypical role. And I just don't understand the need for it. And do not even get me started on all the crosses and pentagram stuff that should not be on a Jewish character. So let's move on briefly to Iceman. Bobby Drake has never been gay, had never been gay until he was gay, arguably, because it was technically a retcon, but it could be argued it wasn't a retcon. So Bobby doesn't get to come out in a storyline that led to both a younger version of Bobby from the past and a present version of older Bobby. You have younger Bobby basically make a sexist comment about Ilyana, and he gets called out for it, but he doesn't get called out for the comment itself as much of like as it's about the fact that like, oh, you're gay. And Bobby's like, but I'm not gay. And Jean's like, oh, of course you're gay. I just read your mind. And as you will see in the next batch of pictures, no one calls her out on this. She's embraced. If you go to the next one, they actually hug and says thank you. And like, oh, it just like, nobody calls Jean out on the fact, like, I think there could have been a better way to get the character to come out. Maybe like younger Bobby sees a world where he could be more open and decides like, oh, screw it, I'm just gonna come out. And then you can have this conversation with older Bobby. But that doesn't happen. Instead, what we see in the next slide is you have younger Bobby doing this very painful Romeo and Juliet thing. And then in the next slide, you have older Bobby, for some reason, being flirted flirting with like Richter at a party, which is the only reason they broke up, Richter and Shatterstar seemingly. And then you have this like really weird thing going on where like Bobby tries to, explore the relationship, but he doesn't, but it doesn't work out because, superheroes don't get happy endings, I guess. So he hasn't really had a consistent, like, I would say healthy progression of an LGBT relationship. The closest that we get is this one guy he briefly dates.
And I gotta throw this out there real quick. Danger the human traffic cone. Ah, Romeo, he was hopeless. I will never tire of that pun.
I'm happy for you. So in the final picture on the older Bobby slide, we have Cullen Bloodstone, who is Elsa Bloodstone's brother. And for some reason, he's flirting with Bobby, even though he's supposed to be, last time we saw him, he was like 14. And he was on Murder World with other teenagers that have not aged, but he has, seemingly. So I don't really know what to make of that. For those just joining us, please feel free to post your questions in the chat. I will take questions. I love questions. But let's move on to America Chavez, where I will be in pain. Very briefly, America is a character that exists. She needs more development as a character, I think, more so than anything else, because she comes off very gruff, very beauty grace that'll punch you in the face, and there's no depth beyond that. And that's very unfortunate. So, as you can see with the, you can just post all the panels. The writing for her has been kind of weird. Especially in the first issue of her solo, where she uses words like holy menstruation, which is just painful. But she also talks about, she breaks up with her girlfriend Lisa because Lisa doesn't want to move across the country while America goes to college, and America breaks up with her, and just over the fact that like she doesn't want to do long distance. Now, realistically, if these were two humans, this would make sense. But she can teleport. She has superpowers. So I don't know. I'm not a fan of her as a character. I think she needs a little bit more depth. Maybe something has changed since then, but I don't know. Let's talk about the Runaways. Oh, the Runaways. A team of children that realize their parents are supervillains. And we have Carolina Dean, who comes out as a lesbian in the initial run of the comics, which is coming out roughly around the same time as Young Avengers. And to make a long story short, she has a couple of love interests. First is Zaven, who is a Skrull, who is a shapeshifter, and when who comes presented as male. And when Carolina is like, well, that's great, but I'm into girls because they're betrothed, he's like, oh, that's fine, and just shapeshifts into a girl. And slowly it's revealed, at first it's kind of iffy, like, is this person putting on this female persona just for Carolina? Then it's like low-key exposed that like, no, they feel more comfortable this way. But ultimately Zaven leaves for the safety of Carolina. And then she briefly dates Julie Power from the Power Pack, and that was actually a very cute relationship. I think it was like the next stepping stone in a mature relationship for Carolina. But they're broken up by a new writer in the new Runaways comic, and we delve into what I think Marvel has a bisexual problem. Like, for some reason, Marvel doesn't seem to like bisexual characters because they don't write them well. Maybe current comics are doing better. I haven't read many current things that would make me think otherwise, that they're doing better when they're not. So Carolina ends up with Nico, who she had a crush on in the very first run of the series. And anybody seen the Hulu show know that they got together. Anyway, maybe that was done to reflect the show, but I feel like her and Carolina and Julia deserved a better send-off. Anyway, so let's get to Anole. Anole is a very sweet character who like really bonds with Northstar as his mentor, and there's a lot of really great hinting about his sexuality, and he comes out eventually. But his character doesn't go anywhere we see him go on like one date, and you can paste the panel of that, like the end result of the date, because it's very cute. And there could have been so much development, but the current X-Men writers, for some reason, really don't care about these children. And I don't get it. They're such fun characters. They're so cool. There's so much potential for good storylines. Like, come on, people. So, all right, let's get to Prodigy. Prodigy, oh dear Prodigy. When I first read the comics of the X-Men comics that had him in it, he was a mutant that could, or he was a mutant with the ability to like absorb knowledge around him. He was awesome. He was like dynamic, he was sassy, he could be rude, he could be smart. He was a really cool character. And then let's move on to this next photo. First of all, his entire Kieran Gillen sucks. Like, he just sucks. Which David comes out basically in like a life or death scenario where they could potentially die, and regardless of that, he just ends up kissing Teddy out of nowhere, and kind of implies at some point, I don't remember exactly where, that he would be a better boyfriend than Billy, because Kieran Gillen really hated Billy. And this is, first of all, unfortunate because he was kissed without like when he was being manipulated by pheromones by someone else. And the fact that Gillen ignored that or forgot about it. Thank you, Danger the Human Traffic Code, for it. Then everything changed when Kieran Gillen took up the pen.
I'm telling you right now, Danger the Human Traffic Code has the best name of everyone in the group so far commenting.
We don't have that many comments, but yes, thank you. Then everything changed when Kieran Gillen attacked is like the definition of like my entire blog at this point. But David hasn't really been seen. I hope the new he's supposed to be in the new X Factor comic, so hopefully that means he will get more development, because the way that they portrayed him in this comic was just, I would argue, potentially even racist. Like, but I think as a kid, he's such a cool character, and to see him wasted like this is just so painful, and it's so sad. He's used as a plot device. He's used as he's not even given his own arc. He's just a side character. He's there to get the team to Tommy. He's there to annoy Loki. And then Tommy's kidnapping even becomes all about David's issues as opposed to anything else. And that's really sad, because David as a character deserves so much better than this. All right, so here is kind of my brief overview of some of the LGBT characters. I've been talking a lot, so take a look at this list. This is an awesome list. Obviously, Deadpool, I talked a little bit about Mystique and Destiny. Teddy's sister, Philavel, is awesome and is in a relation, or was in a relationship with Moondragon. You have Mariko Yoshida, you have Ayo and Annika, who are in the Dora Milaje. Hopefully we will see them in Black Panther 2. Stryker and Union Jack, who are technically in canon the chronologically oldest superheroes, even though it wasn't revealed that they were in a relationship until much later. And you also have Shade, which is our first drag queen character, and that is a photo of Shade. That's pretty cool. So let's talk about the pink and blue elephant in the room. Snowflake in safe space. What is this? But no, like, seriously, what is this? Because this is awful. Like, I don't understand this. I have so many questions about this. This is on the next slide, Michael, if you haven't yet transitioned.
All right, I'm there.
Okay, cool. Hit the photo. Yeah, they're just terrible. There was so much potential. I've been looking at like different people's redesigns for fun, and they're all so much better than this. Like, first of all, these are really boring names for characters. I understand the whole notion of reclaiming the word, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. But anyway, let's talk about Marvel's current problems. And there's a little panel of Deadpool. Respect the continuity. That is rule number 1. Respect the continuity. Focus on a character first and on relationship second, because there seems to be either they focus too much on relationships or too much on sexuality and not enough on developing good characters. And I think this is true sometimes across all media, not just comic books. Just because a character is not straight doesn't mean they're gay. They could be bi, they could be pan, they could be asexual. There are like no asexual characters anywhere. Editors need to give a shit about lesser known characters because that is a great way to bring in new readers. Like, start it off with known characters and then weave in unknown characters. You can easily do this with the X-Men because the actual like adult X-Men appear in everything. Writers need to actually read the source material. Lord Almighty, like, for the love of Jack Kirby, please read the source material. Like, you don't have to read everything a character was in if it's like Deadpool's or someone, but for lesser known characters like Billy and Teddy, I'm always going to go back to Billy and Teddy, like, read Heinberg's run, because if you're only basing your understanding of these characters on a shitty writer like Gillen, you're just not going to understand these characters, and this clearly shows. Stop stereotyping. Like, I'm not even kidding. Also, I think we need more diversity. Like, I can think of like 2 Jewish LGBT characters. One in Marvel, one in DC. In DC, of course, it is Batwoman. Gail, so thank you. That is a great rule that Gail Simone has. I need all writers to have this rule, which says read the first 6 issues and their most recent 6 issues. To do a quick research for comics characters. Honestly, even like read the wiki page. Like, if I wish that writers would put in the same amount of research that I do towards fan fiction. Like, I know that sounds kind of like whining, but yes, like, I need that to happen. So finally, I think we kind of already went through kind of my recommendations, but here's my recommendation of comics to read. Some of these comics I obviously mentioned, like X Factor, Alpha Flight, but also read the Captain America run by J.M. DeMatteis, which is amazing. Read Young Avengers and Children's Crusade by Alan Heinberg and Jim Chung. Also recommend reading, I think Empire is going to be a good run, so go for that one. Runaways, Avengers Academy, the Iceman solo comics. The Iceman solo comics, while not necessarily handling relationships, while not handling the sexuality aspect of Bobby the best necessarily, do address some great things that I've had issues with in regards to Bobby's character, primarily in regards to his parents. So, and of course, if you do not know, please read Check Please. Check Please is the most adorable comic on the face of the earth. It is about hockey and baking.
Raise the comic up a little bit.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Read Check Please.
There you go.
Awesome. I've never had just so much fun on a story with just like I think we forget sometimes in superhero comics that you can have conflict that helps develop a character that doesn't necessarily cause unnecessary drama. You can have conflict, you can have characters face adversity without delving into that drama. So that is all I have. I think I talked for longer than I was supposed to, but there was a lot to cover, so I'm sorry.
Well, technically speaking, the first 5 minutes was us just doing the intro alone, so you kind of hit that 45, maybe like a little over by 3 minutes or so on the actual presentation that we originally talked about pre-show wise, but you're still good on time.
That's good. I'm glad. So with that, I guess this is the perfect time as any to open it up to questions. You can see these are my social media channels here. Michael will obviously share his, and we'll talk about Nerdy Notions at the end. But if you have questions, this is your time to ask those questions. Please ask me questions. Michael, do you have any questions?
No, I'm good. I've sat for your panel before. So
This is true. Fun story. Michael and I actually met at last year's Awesome Con. For those that don't, listen to our podcast.
Shame on you.
Shame on you. It's a lot of fun. It's Nerdy Notions. It's fun. But we met when I made a snarky comment about the fact that Stan Lee is overrated. And yeah. I have no regrets.
So yeah, we were at so Stan had just passed away, and we were at.
Not just.
Oh no! Well,
Escalade.
well, it's still a few months.
6 months after.
Still, a lot of people will still consider that soon. But yeah, so Awesome Con has done this really cool thing. They did it the year before for Adam West, or 2 years before with Adam West, where they actually had this big board. It was like a 4-sided cardboard thing, and the attendees can sign it, and it actually got sent to the family of like Adam West, and they did the same thing for Stan Lee, where that actually went to Stan Lee's family. And it's a nice thing to do, and that's where you and I had met the first time, where you were like, oh, he's overrated, blah blah blah. I'm like, okay, whatever. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And then we're standing in line for photo ops.
Yeah, I was in line for a photo op with Carrie Elwes, who is oh my god, he's
We were both in line for Carrie Elwes.
Were you? Because I thought you were in line for somebody else first.
I had Carrie Elwes, and my mom and I did Weird Al Yankovic.
Right. Okay. But yeah, and then
and Amy Jo Johnson.
You were also like you had a friend with you, and I remember inviting them to my panel. This PowerPoint has been updated since then. But I'm glad it was a chance meeting that I think worked out perfectly. See, yeah. my mild annoyance with Stan Lee paid off.
Yeah. But
Danger the Human Traffic Cone has a question.
Thoughts? Yeah, I'll read the questions. But real quick before we get to the question, but the thing is, though, is that because we had to wait so long in the photo ops to do our photo ops, that's actually how we really got to chat and talk. And then that's when we were like, oh, yeah, I have this panel happening. And then you're like, oh, I have this panel happening. So we ended up well, you didn't come to my panel, but I came to yours. But, and that's how we...
Because I'm not a wrestling fan.
That's fine. But, yeah, but anyways, that's how... things evolved through that. That's why you go to conventions, you network. So, Danger the Human Traffic Cone. I'm sorry, I just love the name. It's fantastic. When I think of traffic cones, I definitely think of Danger, especially my ride home from work today, where I had no visibility and hail at the same time on the highway. So thoughts on how Stryker's coming out was handled in Avengers Academy, because that was rather a unique situation.
So if Avengers Academy has been a long time ago for me. So if I remember correctly, Stryker, I like them. Here's what I like. Stryker talking to Julie Power kind of about his sexuality, I thought was really good. I love Julie. I think that she should just be like everybody's like bi mentor. Actually, on my list of like characters, she's the only bisexual character that on this list that didn't do something that was poorly written. And this is like she didn't kiss somebody else's girlfriend or boyfriend. You know, she low bar. Anyway. And so along those lines, I liked that conversation. I think Stryker was, I don't remember the exact coming out. I remember the kind of publicity aspect of it, which I thought was interesting because Stryker, he was not a very likable character. I remember that. I remember I was just like, can I hit this kid in the face a little bit? But it was weird. I think I would definitely have to kind of go back and reread it a little bit. I remember that the first time I read it, I was kind of annoyed. The second time I read it, I was like, well, I kind of see what they were trying to do. But I'm afraid I don't have as, blatant opinions as I do about certain other storylines. But that was a great question.
So real quick, Danger the Human Traffic Cone says it's a nickname he earned, or they earned as a movie production assistant. So you must
are awesome.
So you must have been a very dangerous cone at a production. So.
Oh, that actually makes sense if you think about it. But that's really cool. One thing I will say that this is kind of my dream for Marvel, is I kind of want them to like low-key stop stereotyping characters. Actually, high-key stop stereotyping characters. Really give them a chance to. Give them a chance to breathe and follow Gail. First of all, Gail Simona's queen. Like, Gail Simone is amazing. If you have not read her original Birds of Prey run, which I have somewhere here, please do so. It is magic. I also have right behind me here a picture of Lady Blackhawk, who is my favorite bird of prey. But a serious note, though, like, you really should read the first 6 issues and their most recent issues, especially with a character like a Knoll or a Stryker or, you know, Billy and Teddy, who don't have as much appearance. There is literally no excuse for you not to do some basic research. And it takes, like, what, a half an hour to read 6 issues? Maybe an hour if you're taking notes and details, but like one of the most important things, especially in a comic, which is a visual medium, is to not only get the look of a character right, but their sound. Which is why, like, when I write fan fiction, one of the things that I always focus specifically on is the knowledge that I'm writing someone else's character. And that even if I tweak canon, I need to make sure that the things stay in character, that the character's voice shines through, and then it's not just me talking, it is that character speaking. So that's really important.
So I'm not seeing any more questions come up on the queue. So what we're going to do is we're going to do 2 things. For those of you watching this on the website post, we're going to run into social medias real quick. After we end the recording, we'll stay on Twitch a little longer. Anyone wants to chat with us, we can chat for a little post game. So with that, as I bring back up the PowerPoint presentation so people can see it again, Sasha, where can the people find you on the social medias?
geekgirl101.tumblr.com. As always, send me ridiculous questions. I love questions. And also at Geeky Captain on Instagram. Although you will see pictures of this awesome bow, you will also see magical pictures of my amazing cat.
Yep. And then, of course, you can always follow me on the Twitters at the LindenBomb75, Facebook at facebook.com/x75productions, and, of course, everything for me is also on txhthockey.com, and for the podcast Nerdy Notions, it is /nerdy-notions. And then also Sasha and I do another podcast with our friends Ben and Brian, which is Power Dorks, which is our Power Rangers podcast. So you can do txhthockey.com/power-dorks. Nerdy Notions, when we actually return, this is obviously our Pride Month special. Next week we'll be doing Ant-Man and the Wasp, followed by Captain Marvel, followed by Avengers in Endgame, and then Spider-Man Far From Home. And we'll be done with the MCU for a while, and then we actually have a few other things that we're discussing of what the next future episodes post MCU will be for Nerdy Notions. So again, that's txhthockey.com/nerdy-notions for you to go check out the archive and listen to all of our MCU episodes and stuff like that before we go to Ant-Man and the Wasp. So with that, Sasha, take us out.
So thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for bearing with me, as this was basically like an hour-long rant on all of my issues with Marvel right now when it comes to LGBT superheroes. And we hope to catch you next time as you listen to us rant about the Ant-Man and the Wasp and why Cassie Lang is the best character ever.